Hello everyone, and I have a partner.
Hello there, and thank you for coming.
Wow, things look funny. What did I screw up? Oh, that's what I screwed up. I'm trying to be redundant. Don't know what I'm doing. Folks! Oh, wow. Have we got an interesting show, I hope, for you today. So, have you ever just wandered the internet and or come across or searched for sovereign citizens for no good reason?
Are you asking me?
Yeah. How did
Well,
you come upon them?
I've run across funny videos that people love to laugh at, where people are pulled over by police,
Oh,
and,
that's
and
the best ones.
right, and basically they start talking about how they're sovereign citizens, and laws don't really apply to them because all laws are basically commercial code, and so far and so forth. Basically, we all have the freedom to roam and travel. That gives you the right to even climb people's fences. Back in the day, out in the middle of the wilderness, if you were traveling, you were on horseback, and you basically went the way the crow flies. And if you came across a fence, you jumped over it, and then you continued on. There were
Here's
no
a
roads. There were no highways.
Mark Caesar, only in America, shakes head. No, not only in America. That's what's pitiful about this. Actually, it spreads. You have people that pick up the ideology and use it in other countries because of
Oh,
ways certain laws are written.
it's big time in England. Are you kidding
Yeah.
me?
It's a growing phase in England, it's in Canada. I think I ran across an Australian. It's it is the weirdest, stupidest thing. So what I did was I created a web of a bunch of information, and we're gonna try and talk about this
But
information in
but
some
but wait a
sensible
second.
manner.
But wait a second. Is it the weirdest and stupidest thing?
No,
No.
maybe not. It's among that list that you can claim it as a weird and stupid thing. It's a weirdest to some. I mean, as
I mean,
far as things go, have you
it's
dug in
odd.
and done the research on what they're
Well, no,
claiming?
I kind of let you do that. I kind of research it by just watching people and watching the videos, and being kind of like an average Joe taking it all in.
Um, yeah, well, Mark Caesar, actually, there's a couple of those YouTube videos that you would believe are American, but they're Canadian. They're just, near the American line, and people live in Canada, and they latch onto this. From what I've found, I had 2 weeks on this. I apologize for the lapse in the show last week. Or no, we did take last week off. I relaxed.
Yeah, you had vacation. Don't apologize, for Christ's sake. You're allowed to
So
have fun too.
so 2 weeks I've been looking this up, and whoever follows cognitive thought, lovingly or not, cognitive thought does some of these because they're funny. He'll play through, comment, and laugh at these sovereign citizen videos. So I had some mild exposure, and I got a good laugh, much like you. But when you present this as a idea to talk about, I have to figure out, okay, they're saying stupid things. What are they saying? Okay, why are they
Again,
saying stupid
again, you're
things?
saying that they're saying stupid things, but in actuality, they're looking shit up. They're
Yes.
interpreting shit.
It
So just to say something off the cuff, not really knowing anything, is one thing. But
The further I
study,
dug, the more sense it made.
right, exactly. So
It's
can you fault them? I mean,
no.
if you coming at this trying to debunk it are starting to be convinced that there's a point to it, then let's cut them a little slack. Maybe they're not 100% wrong.
All right. So there is a loose point, and there's a huge conspiracy around this, and I wanna delve hard into it, but I want to make sure everybody that wants to be here is here for this. So let's first acknowledge our chat. We have Mark Caesar. Hello again, and welcome to the chat. I hope you enjoy this. If you like conspiracy theorists, Red Feather, how dare I? Wow, this chat is fired up. Calm down, people. That's right. Everybody, just relax. Stay in your chairs. Don't light anything on fire. We are not revolting against the country.
Well, it isn't a country. It's a corporation.
Okay, so I can follow you. But do you know, if you dig deep enough in the right places, you can find so much information. It's ridiculous. And I even went so far as to hunt down a quote from the Supreme Court. So, I've been through.
There's a really cool quote by Mark Twain. I don't know if you've ever seen that or heard that. But go ahead.
I guess let's start with leading people, because we want you guys to understand why we picked this topic. Now, when you're all born, when you get married, when you do anything that's legal that involves government interaction, paperwork, and filing, there's an awful lot of paperwork and wording and ways they go about this. And one thing you'll notice is anything interacting with the federal or state government often has your name, almost always has your name, all in capital letters. And there's a reason for that. That's because they're proclaiming you as an inherent party. And if you look on your birth certificate, your social security card, your marriage license, you'll notice some words, they're regular. They're capital and lowercase, just regular grammar. But then when it comes to your name, it's all capitals. Much the same thing is done if you file taxes or own a business or a corporation. When you fill out paperwork and filings and get paperwork and filings, everything's in capital letters. Everything's correctly formatted and filled out. Now, this becomes a factor because your name is not all capital letters. It's capital and then lowercase. By putting your name in capital letters, they're kind of representing you as an individual, as a business party.
What is a name?
It's an assignment of your identity. I mean, that's all it is, a way to tell people apart.
I mean, a first name and a last name. Your name is really just your first name. Your last name is your family name.
Right.
And a lot of times back in the day when people really didn't even have a family name, their last name would be the location their family was in.
Or their profession, or whatever.
Or a profession, or
right.
Exactly. And that's where a lot of our names come from.
Now, I find it weird. You hear a lot of things said about how this all works, but as you piece it together, there's something you learn about business. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you, in America, obviously, fill out for, I believe it's called a DIN number. It's something you need in order to open a business and register to pay your taxes and all that stuff as a business. That number is also assigned all rights of an individual. So businesses and corporations with that number have the rights of an individual. So if you own a business that have voting rights, I'm still searching on that. That's in the air right now. I'm trying to figure out how that works. Does a corporation have voting rights? How do they vote and influence on elections? Because of that filing, because they file for a DIN number, that DIN number, according to the federal government, is equal to your social security number. So this is something I knew before digging, and it correlates, stating that you are basically the same as a corporate entity. You're being held at the same height as a business regarding any interactions with the government. Data was telling me a story about checks, and I can't seem to find my checkbook. I know where the magnifying glass is, but I don't have my checkbook to go through it. Would you?
I was just going to tell the chat. Basically, I started looking into this and watching the videos or whatnot, and then somebody threw me for a loop because he said, this is all hidden in plain sight. And a matter of fact, if you take a look at your personal checkbook, your personal checks, not those long corporate checks, but the personal little personal handheld checkbook. If you look at the signature line, which looks perfectly like a line to my eyes, and you look real close. And I ended up having to use two magnifying glasses, one a jeweler's loop and one a large paper type magnifying glass. And between focusing those two planes and the paper, I got it so close where it said, this signature represents the, what was it? The assignee. And I was like kind of astounded that that would be on a personal checkbook. I mean, I can understand a corporate checkbook because, corporate checks are corporate checks. So you're dealing with a company. So a person's signature isn't necessarily even in the name of the account. But yeah, so that kind of like, if you're going to write it there, why microtext? Why not just write it as a statement under the line? So that kind of intrigued me, and I started watching more and more. Go ahead.
All right, so and this becomes very important in building the story. That's why I want to make sure we get a little bit out of why the build up and why we're looking at this entirely is because there's a lot of information that really does almost make you lean toward wanting to follow them. But then if you're willing to read through enough court case documents and trial outcomes and opinion pieces from the Supreme Court, you start learning more beyond what they're citing. And then you find a little chuckle about what they're citing. A lot of them I noticed seem to cite a Supreme Court case in 1871. I want to say I have it written down here. Yes, it was the D.C. Organic Government. I wrote the whole thing out. It was the District of Columbia Organic Act of 1871. Now, what this did in the definitions as listed in 28 U.S. Code 3002 15A, it created an incorporation for the government to operate as a township and provide funds to and from businesses to accommodate for the transactions of the government to proceed access in that area. What it's misinterpreted as is the category 28 U.S. Code 3002 is the category for the definitions to state and define the way the government will proceed with things. So for their reference, when they state these things, this is how it is interpreted. And that's what the definitions page is for. That's what 28 Code US 3002.
But their interpretation of it is a national interpretation, when in actuality this is just dealing with the District of Columbia, the area that the government is basically home in.
It was 3 towns. It was the District of Columbia. It was the what's the not Gettysburg. I'm not thinking Gettysburg, but that's the first one that popped to my head.
Richmond, Virginia.
Richmond. No, I want to say it's somewhere closer, like Georgetown. I've driven through the town and I can't think of it.
Okay, yeah, it's probably Georgetown.
It's right up butted with Washington, D.C. Now, when you read through the way this was all done, what they tried to do is they tried to take Washington, D.C. and the surrounding area and take it from 3 municipalities down to a governing municipality over the states as a federal institution. So in order to do that, the federal government had to be able to pay the state government and vice versa and pay private contractors to do work like trash cleanup. It would be removed from the municipalities and paid for by the federal government as an operating area of the federal government.
Right.
28 U.S. Code 3002 basically helped to define the circumstances by which they would refer to the changeover from state and local municipality into a federal municipality. So it would have been federal land instead of state land, instead of just being the District of Columbia or Columbia there on Maryland side, I think. It would be the larger area to be able to encompass more getting done. So one of the pages they cite is literally a definitions page that, and I didn't write it down, I should have, refers to the U.S. government as a corporation or able to make corporate decisions, basically.
This was 1871?
This was in 1871. This was the District of Columbia Organic Act of 1871.
But there's also another date that they're always citing too.
Well, there is, and we're gonna. Hopefully, I got all the right dates, and we will get there. In 1875, let me continue with this one. In 1875, there was a congressional overturn of the District of Columbia Organic Act of 1871. It was reorganized and re-separated back into the individual municipalities. And what happened was, it was either, I have written down, I'm not sure, I couldn't find it in the text when I went back to make these notes. In 1878 or 1888, it was again reorganized into a District of Columbia Organic Act. However, it took over less area and converted less stuff to the municipalities and put fewer people in charge of that area. So it changed the construction. A lot of things they seem to refer to come up. But the weird thing is, this becomes a defining year. In the way I'm trying to look at this, this becomes one of the first things that a sovereign citizen cites. The Act of 1871.
Okay, let's also put this date in some sort of context. Wasn't DC burnt to the ground in the 1800s?
Yes, it was earlier in the. I want to say it was 39. I could be absolutely wrong, but I want to say it was early 1800s.
The English burned Washington D.C. or tried to burn Washington D.C. to the ground in like the 1830s.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're talking about 50 years later or 45 years later.
1814 says Dr. Obvious. Thank you. I knew it was early in the 1800s.
Oh, so even earlier than that. Okay.
Now there's.
So no love.
Twisted, no
love for Britain. At this time, no love for Britain.
Oh, absolutely not. I also want to welcome Doc Griffin, Dr. Obvious, Denny Crane.
Hey guys, thanks
Sora
for coming.
Luna. Anybody else I'm missing, I apologize. I want to welcome you guys to chat. There's a lot of information going on tonight. Feel free to speak freely. If you want me to say something, give me that orange box like Doc did. Making your rounds. Stick around, hang out. This could be interesting. It could be a good laugh by the end. Or maybe we'll have you convinced. We'll see.
Or maybe we'll understand where the other people are coming from.
Yeah, that's kind of what I sort of do, but I made the notes to try and untwist my mind, and it's not working very well. That's how in depth this is.
Right. It's believable to the layman.
Okay, so before we go too much further, we keep saying sovereign citizen, and I wrote a note on the top of my page that if you actually go through and look at sovereign citizen, a sovereign citizen, the definition of that term is a member of someone or a person belonging to land owned by a monarchy, therefore run by a king.
Right. In actuality, they see themselves as sovereigns. In other words, they're saying back before the scam, people were sovereign. They were kings of their own house, kings of their own castle. They could walk down the street out in the West. If you had a problem with somebody, you could take it outside, shoot each other, and they just cleaned up afterwards and continue playing or doing whatever they were doing.
Now, this sounds weird, but they're currently referred to, or I know it's the media that pushes them as sovereign citizens, which is an inappropriate claim, obviously. I believe they're referred to as statists, that the power belongs to the states as a group.
Okay.
Or something along those lines. Again, guys, if I'm wrong, correct me. And to the best of my knowledge, the numbers I've seen, there are between 75,000 and 300,000+ worldwide. This is a worldwide count, which makes no sense to me, but there it is.
Well, because there's sovereign citizens in all different countries.
Right. Um, let's see. So we went over the DC organic government. We went over where incorporated appears in the 28 U.S. Code 3002-15A and how that is, well, let's link that up to the checks and the money and the capital letters. The reason that they think the government incorporated is because in the early to mid 1800s, the United States went broke. We had no money, we had high debt from the wars that we were having, and we needed to find a financial solution. So, what it's believed, and there is some tracking that, I mean, I got 2 pages, like little tiny handwriting. Not enough room on here to go over all of this. Between 1800 and 1900, a lot of things changed on recording birth certificates, on recording legal documents, on what rights belonged to what state, where, why, how. This was also the time that we were not only beginning to look at abolishing slavery, but we were also beginning to acquire the second or the middle third of our country, I should say. The Louisiana, Nebraska purchases. I'm forgetting what the third one was that was in the north. And Congress was having a fight over whether or not slavery would be legal or illegal in the states or the territories that we acquired. And there was a latitudinal line. And then there was a court case, I believe it was in the early 60s, that tried to declare that a person who moved there with their slave, the slave would then be free because it's free land as long as you lived in a certain area. And there was a lot of confusion and laws being written and then immediately changed because they weren't agreed on. So some of the laws, in fact a good part of some of these laws, are null. At this point, they're citing laws that have been overturned.
Right. Well, and that's the thing too. Law is a growing, aging, transforming book of writing. I mean, it's pretty much like the encyclopedia. If you know what an encyclopedia is, it was back in the day. It was the World Wide Web back in the day before the World Wide Web, and it was a stack of books that had all knowledge, or at least all knowledge up to that particular date.
Now, one of the codes from, and again, this is part of why it confuses me. One of the codes they cite is U.S. Code 18 U.S. Code 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. Depriving rights given by the Constitution cannot treat people different because of color, residency, alien, or race. So, and this was in 1948. So they're saying you're violating my rights under the color of the law. When they say that, they're referring to 1948 U.S. Code 242, or 18 U.S. Code 242.
They're cherry picking what they need.
Okay, so here's the funny part. I'm going to throw a wrench in the huge thing. So we're following this through. I'm trying to be delicate. There's a lot more information than I have. Trust me. If you believe the U.S. government became illegitimate in 1871, and that nothing the U.S. government did after that point is law, is legal, that everything they did is a violation, why are you quoting a law from 1948?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, why are you quoting something that was written after you believe the entire government is illegitimate?
There's a guy named Jordan Maxwell. I sent you a little bit of video on him, and I think that's kind of the root of where this phenomenon has basically come from. And Jordan Maxwell is an interesting guy to listen to when he's talking, and basically he kind of researched where words came from. And I mean, he went all the way as far back as the Sumerians, and he has an interesting take on this also, and he's the one who also brought up your birth certificate being bonded. You heard about that, right?
Yes.
We're all, since we're not, okay, first of all, the United States is a corporation, and in its corporate terminology, or in its corporate book, it states that all citizens are employees. So if you're asked in court, are you a citizen of the United States? You're not supposed to say yes in Jordan Maxwell's opinion, because if you say yes, then you are agreeing that you are a employee of the corporation of the United States. What you're supposed to say is that you were born in America, because America is not the United States corporation. But, you know, that's just one small point to his wordplay, and it's impressive. I mean, you know, the whole thing about maritime law, and a ship, when it's docked, it's at berth, and basically he you have to really see it to believe it. You have to listen to him to really grasp it. But people walk out there at the end of this conversation, and they're standing and applauding. So there's belief. There's no no problem finding people that believe.
There is definitely, they firmly believe that this is written from maritime law, from exactly what you were saying. When a ship berths into harbor, it produces its cargo manifest. When someone births a baby, it produces a manifest. It produces a birth certificate. That birth certificate is binding. It explains all of the same information as a cargo manifest from a ship.
It also transfers ownership.
So, well, that can be argued on the birth certificate. The birth certificate sort of assigns ownership. I don't know if it really transfers ownership.
Right. Assigns ownership. I'm sorry, you're right.
So this all starts to kind of feed into the conspiracy that we're being bought out by the government. I have a few other things that I want to say I sort of cherry picked, but this is their things that I searched that didn't get all of them in my notes. In the freedom to move in the United States. So there's a few laws in 1823, freedom of movement recognized as a constitutional right. In 1869, the court defined freedom of movement as the right of free ingress into other states and egress from them. However, the Supreme Court did not invest the federal government with the authority to protect the freedom of movement under the privileges of immunities. This authority was given to the states, a possession of the court held consistently that the years the case, Ward versus Maryland, we'll get to that. And there's a few other cases cited here in 71, 73, and 1883, just to be clear, to say that basically you have the freedom to move within states. But if you go into those laws and read deeper, it's the freedom to legally and lawfully move between states. So if there's a law that says you must do this to move through the state and you follow that law, then you can proceed. They can't stop you. They also can't, at every border between states, hold and check everybody because you're supposed to freely move. They can randomly spot check or check you when you're out of state, but they can't prevent you to travel from, I want to go from California to Nevada. They cannot prevent that. They can't stop that. They can't say you're a California resident, you're not allowed in Nevada. It's not allowed. It's illegal. That's what that says. I have several others in here. Hopefully they don't get confusing. Or on the other device. I think they're on the other device. Let me see. But it goes into the point that they use separate sided defenses from laws that have either been overturned or they claim they already don't believe in because they were written after they believed the government ended. There's so many circumstances behind this. I got the Organic Act, Section 28.
Well,
U.S. is a corporation.
Do they believe that the government ended, or do they believe that the government was basically bought and paid for and in control of the English, the royal crown?
Okay, thank you, because that's very important that you say that. It leads me to a point that I'm trying to get to later about someone. But as you look through sovereign citizens, it's not one group of people. You'll notice that different sovereign citizens claim different rights. They all sound kind of the same. They're built on a familiar or similar premise. But each one cites different laws, kind of leaning towards different rights that they're given because of different laws that are there. I started with the basic ones. The one in 1871 is a really heavily cited law to almost every one of them.
Gotcha.
But one thing I think I commented to you like Tuesday, I was like, there are just so many different kinds. I don't know how to discuss them without leaving some out.
There's the Moorish citizens. There's the African citizens. There's
we're not making fun of them either. These are self-proclaimed names. These are their names for what type of citizens there are.
Right. That matter of fact, one they have parallel. There was one that has an entire parallel government with president and his cabinet.
Okay, so you're actually wrong. There's more than one. But you introduced me to one. Okay, yeah, okay. So yeah, don't dig too deep. This rabbit hole sucks.
Well, yeah, the one that I like. My favorite of them all is the one that I showed you. But yeah, there's plenty others with their own. Some of them have a king. Some of them have a president, and some of them have a what's it called? What do the English have? Prime minister.
Okay, so one of them that I delved into, apparently in 2010, had sent an order to the United Nations, the World Court, the United States Supreme Court, the British Supreme Court, several other countries. And if you look for the letter, you can find it. It's separating and repealing the incorporation of the United States as listed in the District of Columbia Organic Act of 1871 and reaffirming the Republic of the States of America, I believe it was. It's weird in the wording. It's close, but weird, stating that specific wording inclines the United States to be a government. Other wording inclines the United States to be a republic. This is odd.
And other again inclines it to be a corporation.
Right. This is odd because in 2015 apparently they held another presidential election, and they have a government that's I think 200 and something total people between the federal and the states, and they operate like this weird shadow government right next to within how the government operates, but the wording and the forms and everything are different. That was one big one that caught me, and in trying to search for that, it got really hard because there was a few different ones. So I tried to stick with a couple of big ones and get a couple aspects and avenues to look at. And then I found Leighton Lionel Ward, who runs Go ahead.
What I was gonna say was, isn't it also kind of getting difficult because the browsers are filtering this stuff?
Oh, I'm sure they are, and I'm getting very specific.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you have to go to the 5th or 6th page just to get a glimmer.
All right, with all honesty, you can find a video laughing at a sovereign citizen like that. You cannot find a sovereign citizen telling you what and how and why they believe it.
Exactly.
You can find articles about what they've done, where they've done it, how they've done it. You can't find places where they sit. Like it's. I'm
You can't
searching.
find their website.
I'm sure I'll find it if I did a deeper dive. But I haven't run across easy to find information about their point of view and why they follow it.
Right. Even they're down to their website. I mean, eventually you'll find it, but it's not. It's like the search engine's really dropping a ball when it comes to that.
And I'm
Or,
don't get me
or
wrong, I know how to search.
right, or you have to put in that specific, exactly that name, verbatim, perfectly, fonted, to be able to find the actual websites for these places.
Right. Which brought me to Light and Lionel Ward, which is of our time the biggest
Sovereign
statist
citizen.
sovereign citizen. Let's stick with sovereign citizen.
Okay.
He's the sovereign citizen of our time because he, at 43 years old currently, pardon me, is in prison, and there's a whole bunch around him. And I'll work backwards just for fun. The beginning of last month, the judge ordered that after 3 weeks of forcibly starving himself, that they can force food into his mouth.
He
That
was
doesn't sound funny, but it does to me because that wasn't the last thing I came up with.
he was called a paper terrorist.
Yeah.
And he was more of a con artist using these sovereign citizen loopholes, let's say, in legal warfare.
Okay. I sit in my garage and listen to some of this, and sometimes I wish I had a vise attached to the counter to be able to clamp things down and work on stuff, sharpen blades, whatever. And then there's moments I'm glad I don't, because I might just stick my head in there and see how tight I can go before it cracks. This is one of those cases because I sat there in the garage having a cigarette and listened to a 27-minute recording between him, his attorney, the opposing attorney, and a third-party arbitrator before the court case in 2014, I think. Oh my God, I feel stupid. And then I'm searching the internet for the stuff he's talking about, and it's not there. I don't know if anybody's heard about him.
Let's look at chat for a second.
Oh, what do you got in chat here? NumbedSkull, I know how to search, sir. Sir, I know how to search, sir. I bought 10 bones. I say let him starve. The court ordered that because his case isn't over yet, and he hasn't been found guilty or innocent, that they have the right to be able to force him to eat. If they can't get him to eat or he tries to throw it up, they're going to get a court order to strap him down to a bed. I haven't looked to see. I think June 19th was the last one that he was ordered to eat and that they forced food into him. But I haven't seen anything more local than that on him. And the reason that's funny is with this federal coastal court, he is one of the reasons he's the biggest example of what they call paper terrorism. And what he did was he created a form of the sovereign citizen government and called it the Federal Postal Court. And he started filing paperwork on legitimate courts and legitimate officers under legitimate U.S. law, such that they would or could actually win, except for that his court filing everything was illegitimate.
Right. But the postal court was a here again, gone tomorrow, Benjamin Franklin invention before we really even had major court system.
Right. It wasn't even a part of our standing government. And that's one that goes back and picks something even farther back that I didn't catch. And I find it funny because the amount of paperwork he filed and the way he did it was, again, paper terrorism. Huge amounts of paperwork filed on legitimate people in government positions doing their job. Now,
or on homeowners to steal a house right out from under them.
Right. And oh, there's so many stories of that one that I ran across. One of the things, and I didn't quite get there, I wrote it on my list, but I couldn't go back and find the notes. There's something written in the Articles of Confederacy that they believe gives them the right to do certain things in one sect of sovereign citizens. The Declaration of Independence was in 1776. July 4th is the official national date of incorporation for the United States of America. Well, think about that. If we are a company, we have been a company since our incorporation date of July 4th, 1776. We have our Constitution, which was written, I think, in 1786, ratified in 1788. I may be wrong. Somebody correct me if I am, please. We have our Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. There's something they cite. I wrote it down. Where did I put it? In the Fourth Amendment. I didn't write it down. I thought I wrote it down. There's something they cite in the Fourth Amendment about the egress of their movement between states. I think I covered that. What else is there? There's a few more things I've got here that I wanted to hit, and then some just stuff I've seen that's interesting. They say police aren't official legal bodies, that they were set into motion after the 1871. So just for fun, I did some searching. The United States didn't officially have police. However, certain towns within states decided to ratify their own police departments under their means. So police have existed since 1636 in Boston, 1658 in New York, and 1700 in Philadelphia.
One form or another.
In some sort of police, right. An actual group of people policing and monitoring town hired by the local government.
Right.
I want to say there's something called Police Week. I don't remember all the dates on this. Was it Roosevelt? I didn't write it down. Why didn't I write this all down? Because I probably have 30 pages of notes if I wrote all the stuff down I came across, and that's not a joke.
Yeah, no, it's a huge subject. It's mind-boggling how much work has been done on it.
But I did pick a fun quote from the Supreme Court. In 1941, the United States versus the Cooper Corporation. I didn't look too deep into this. This is a quote that I found that was related to what we're talking about loosely. It was done March 6th of 1941. We may say in passing that the United States may be treated as a corporation organized under its own law. Did I write this wrong? I thought it said we may not say. I may have written this wrong. We may not say in passing that the United States may be treated as a corporation organized under its own laws. That it is, under the Constitution, as a fundamental law, seems so strained as not to merit serious consideration. That's what it was. So to consider the United States government a corporation that was formed after the forming of the country is seems so strained as not to merit serious consideration from the United States Supreme Court in 1941 in the United States versus Cooper Corporation. So again, I'm not entirely sure 100% on the reference, but it's regarding whether or not the United States court viewed the United States as a corporation in somebody suing the United States as a corporation.
People for the longest time believe we are being screwed. We are being hoodwinked. We are being, sent to the slaughter. And they're digging as deep as they can to find the reality or find the support for the reality that they feel.
I love that movie too, Red Feather. I thought it was awesome.
Speaking of quotes, Mark Twain quoted, and this is something that a sovereign citizen would really follow, and that is, here we go. In religion and politics, people's beliefs and convictions are in almost every case gotten of secondhand and without examination. from authorities who have not themselves examined the questions at issue, but have taken them at second hand from other non-examiners whose opinions about them were not worth a brass farthing. So basically, to all the people out there laughing at sovereign citizens, their reality is what they believe, and nobody's looked it up, and they're just taking it, at word from their school, or at word from their family, or at word from their association or group. So, consider that too.
All right, so I got a few comments I didn't write down. These are weird. And then I want to get some questions from the chat. Absolutely want to try to answer whatever I can. In looking up the incorporation of the government in the District of Columbia, the Organic Act of 1871, it wasn't the first. And I believe I read an article that cited in 2015 that at the point of 2015, there had been 12 reorganizations and government restructuring of Columbia and the District of Columbia and Georgetown, I think it is. Georgetown, I think. Maybe I'm wrong. Down there. So it's not something that doesn't happen regularly. The government constantly has to, and they have to do it legitimately on paper, organize and state exactly what they're doing so that everybody knows what they're doing, because that's what the government's supposed to do. Now, obviously there is, like Red Feather says, we have NGOs. I think that's the wrong term. Operating in this country, CIA, FBI, IRS, DOD, FDA, etc., etc., etc. There's 27. Do you remember? I think I heard it was 27 national government organizations policing the United States.
3-letter agencies.
Yeah, 27 of them. I'm not 100%, but I think it was 27 last I heard, and that was like something that came out in 2017.
And Google's owned by a company called Alphabet.
Yeah, gee.
Think about that.
To think about things, the government has gone through changes. Around the same time as this 1871. I'm probably going to cite these years wrong, guys, but let me do my best. In the 30s or 40s, there was a few problems, and there was some changes in the government. We didn't originally have Democrats and Republicans. That's changed. Originally, we had another group. Somebody help me, I can't remember their name. And they were opposing the Democratic Republicans. Those were the parties that we had. And what had happened was the opposing group was the northern group, the one I can't remember, and they wanted to abolish slavery and make it illegal to use people as property. So they tried to set into laws for the purchases that we were making of the new territories, as those territories and areas were allowed to become states. In order for that territory to become a state, it has to follow, what is it, Article 4, Article 9, Article 4, Section 3, adaptation into statehood. And that's where the colors of the law quote come from, moving through states, is this time where they're trying to change the ability and the way for you to move based on your race. The Democratic Republicans wanted to keep slavery, and they wanted slaves to be able to be taken and moved to do work in new territories to provide for income for the country and to help businesses grow. The opposing side didn't want this to happen, and so what the Democratic Republicans did was they hit the other group and took away all of their philosophies during election periods. So the Democratic Republicans split into two separate parties and began to run on separate platforms against the original second party. Why can't I remember the name? And in doing this, they began to pick up the votes of people who may have believed in other things, but not necessarily realized how the Democrats or the Republicans were going to represent slavery. Once the third party was ruined, once they pretty much got that party dissolved into the other two, the Democratic Party began to really push heavy for slavery, But as a byproduct, the party that dissolved began to move into the Republican Party as the Republican Party started to push to free slaves. Now, in this time, there was a law written into Congress somewhere around the 1850s stating that slavery was legal at the 36-degree 33rd minute parallel across the United States, making it illegal in Louisiana and the recently purchased Northern Territory, however, legal in the large recently purchased Southern Territory north of Texas and south of south of Louisiana, I think it was. Now, this was the areas that we purchased to the west of the Mississippi in the early 1800s, and they were territories, not states. So the laws in these were different because states had rights and protections, but territories necessarily did not. And in order to figure that out, you actually have to look into the way we currently run things and why the District of Columbia isn't a state, why Cuba and other areas aren't a state. It's because of their incorporation into the United States. It is a legal binding term. Wherever it came from, it is at this point a government legal binding term. The abolitionists, yes, that's their name, but that was not their government party. In my opinion, the NGOs, because no one else elects them to power, the abolitionists. What was slavery in the North? There was slavery in the North, another misconception. Yes, there was slavery in the North. However, it was primarily the party that resided in the North that was pushing against slavery. And one of the ways they were able to start doing it was they were writing compromises into the congressional debates for turning territories into states. One of the states' fights was, obviously, this was something that led up to the Civil War in 1861. One of the problems was that anytime they were trying to get anything passed, they would write a bylaw in. The Congress would write in these little caveats that, okay, well, they can have this, this, and this, but slavery is legal. And this continued to cause contention, and things that were passed one year were removed a year or two later because the government was fighting amongst itself, trying to absorb this third party and move forward with slavery. Interesting side note, if you dig deep enough into history, this I knew before searching for this, but slavery was started in the late 1600s, or was it late 1700s, by a black indentured servant owner.
Well, it was legally described. The first description of a slave literally giving his entire life to another person was in a court case,
legal case of slavery
involving a black slave owner refusing to pay off a indentured servant that actually fulfilled his work and was ready to get his little stipend and his little I think it was a mule and something else, and go off
a
to
rifle,
life.
Food and money.
Right. And the black slave owner did not want to pay him, so he took him to court, and the court deemed that this indentured servant was now a lifetime slave owned by this gentleman, this black gentleman.
And that was the beginning of illegal slavery in the United States. Started, coincidentally, by a black man owning a black man.
And his name was Jefferson.
So,
I think.
Interesting caveat, has nothing really to do with this, but this is all happening in this huge jumbled time of where people are picking these laws from. If you think we have turmoil going on in the government, I'm reading about the 1800s going, holy shit. They were changing things every year. They would ratify and push something through one year, and the next year it would be turned around and changed or repealed and redone 2 years later. To go through court cases, they were continuously retried every few years on certain things. because people would keep trying the verdict. And this, again, was young in our country. People didn't know what to do. The country was not even 100 years old in some cases, up until the paperwork they were going on wasn't even 100 years old. They were between the country and the paperwork being maybe 100. They didn't know what to do. They were following what they could, and they didn't have anybody to talk to. They were starting to make decisions without the elders around. What do we do? They're gone. All these people that knew and what to do were just going off of what they had on paper. How do we interpret this? And they were doing their best, I guess. But it's a jumbled time where laws kept changing. Parties were changing and dissolving and moving. Slavery became legal and then changed and then repealed and then reformed. And the way we did things was in turmoil. And these are the laws that they're citing from, are these laws that were being changed. Half of the stuff that they go after is stuff that's not even in effect in the government right now.
I've heard this term: a black man is worth 3/4 of a white man, and it's written 3/5, and it's written in the Constitution, not the Constitution, but it's written somewhere. And
yeah, it's written in the amendments.
But in actuality, that's a smaller excerpt. The 3/5 meaning representation in Congress.
No.
Not value.
All right, so after slavery was repealed, the value of a slave's vote,
right,
was 3/5 of that of a white person or somebody who wasn't before.
Yeah,
slave.
but I think that came from that quote, and that quote was for representation in Congress.
Yes, it was, because there was a congressional debate over whether or not some states would be granted the officials to represent them. And if they were, at that time, as slavery was being repealed, if they were granted the officials to represent their constituency based on the number of people, not including, not dissolving slaves' worth, if they did a representation based on people, the South would have probably won. Which was a funny oxymoron, is because the South wanted to win in slavery, but they couldn't get the votes to pull it off. But if they had counted their slaves as a full vote, they had more people to vote.
Right. So this was a way of blocking them by saying the African population was less representative, therefore less voter counted.
So I have to say, aside from conspiracy theory on sovereign citizens, okay, to look at what's going on between the Democrats and the Republicans right now, I almost begin to laugh, because I see
they're not
Democratic rules set in a few years ago have now been repealed, and now we're setting in Republican rules that, do this and that, and the government's in a stir, and they're fighting left and right, and maybe...
Yeah,
go ahead.
What I was about to say is, it's all this big fight and this big drama and this and that and the other. But if you look at Congress as a whole, and you look back 30 years... what the hell have they done for 30 years?
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
Absolutely.
You compare that 30 years to the 30 years between 1700 and 1800, somewhere in there, and they were forming a country. They were exploring new territory, legally and physically. I mean, it's kind of sad, really.
But I look at what's going on right now, and you'll see it too. I'm gonna offer you guys a firm analogy as we start to wrap this show up. Think about the Democrats right now, and they're trying to push a democratic socialism, and the Republicans are just pushing what the Republicans are pushing. And I find it funny, because I've never delved so deep into how the United States did things, and the laws and the proceedings and things like that I have for looking into sovereign citizens and learning what I did about the early 1800s. And you can easily compare what happened in the early and mid 1800s around the repeal of slavery, if you remove slavery from it and compare it to today and the fights and the turmoil and people want this and people want that. Pardon me, the soda's coming back. And people want this and people want that. It almost looks like the Democratic Party is going to do what the Democratic Republicans did to survive. And then one of the parties might end up dissolving. Okay, so look at this way. There wasn't two parties. One of them dissolved and was eaten by the Democratic Republicans, which split to do it and made two parties. So the Democrats kind of right now are splitting into two parties. They're splitting into the Democrats and the Democratic Socialist. So if this continues with that same pattern that happened, just mild association in my mind, then what would happen is the Democrats would split probably to two new names or something different. And they would do their best to attempt to eat the values of the Republican Party and pick them apart until we end up, again, having two maybe new parties entirely, but the values change, and it's a matter of trying to figure out who's actually holding the values you were then looking for, because they picked at them to get people to pull to their side. So just keep an eye out for that.
Have you ever seen how many parties legally there are right now?
Yeah, I want to join the party. If they finally got their legal representation, I'm joining the party.
Well, it was in England. They had some sort of survey, a government survey on religions, and enough people signed up as the Force to have Star Wars the Force as a religion. So it's now a legal religion
So I need to check my midichlorians.
And there's actually people that are marrying in costume. So
the world is a crazy place. There's crazy people in it, and there's somewhere they got their craziness from. They read something or saw something or did something. Instead of being properly inspired by a teacher, they sat in the corner and saw this word, and they stuck with that word. And that word was something, not necessarily, but we'll call that word conspiracy. And then that word turned into a phrase, and that phrase turned into a paragraph, and that paragraph turned into a page, and the page turned into a book. And now they have this book that they live by that has nothing to do with how the rest of us understood being pushed to do better in school. Don't sit in the dark corner. Read the whole book. Someone said if you don't hold values, the left will take over. Federalist Party was the second party. The Federalist Party, thank you. It was the Federalist Party and the Democratic Republicans. You're very right there. I love it when people help, because I read so much information I can't even remember it all. Just too much. 13 court cases between who had rights to move between states, whether or not a slave had a right to be transferred to a free state, or whether that slave would be freed, whether or not new states would have it. I read one of the congressional passings that they tried to slim through that would grant Louisiana the right to have slaves, but there was something written into the purchase of Louisiana that prohibited the Congress to allow slavery in there. So then Congress had to write a law that included, or something, ratify something that included slavery couldn't happen above the 33rd degree, 36th parallel, because it wasn't permitted under the agreement of one of the purchases, something like that. It gets really confusing. And it's very legal. The shit party. Did you know that there are 7 different kinds of shit? Just saying.
TMI, man. TMI.
There's actually a medical chart for it. There's 7 different categories of shit.
I'm sure.
And you want to be in the middle. Then there's 3 worst categories in one direction and 3 worst categories in the other direction.
In the middle of a bunch of shit. Good topic.
I think it was a good... Boy, dude, did I have to do digging to find some stuff. But this was definitely informative. 2 weeks on it, though, too. Imagine what I would have gotten 1 week. I wouldn't have gotten this deep. 2 weeks, I found a lot. And there is more that I'm not even covering because You hit a point where you follow case to case to case in the order that they happened, either proceeding forward chronologically, what overtook what, or backwards from what was the ending case and what was the verdict before that. And you read through enough of those and you lose track of where you started.
There's lots of little details, lots of little information. That Jordan Maxwell fella, he has, I mean, he goes all the way into the point where a woman's birth canal. Why did they name it a canal? You know, why is the doctor called a doc? You know, by the time he was done, there was so much. There's so much connection between female anatomy and marine law. You just have to believe it.
You give me long enough to build a story, and I can give you a story that's believable by making it relate to something you already know and believe. That's right. Part of making a story believable is you have to ground it in reality. So yes, their story is believable because if you look for what they're citing, it's there. However...
And they're preaching to the choir when it comes to the audience.
Yeah.
Most of the audience members have come there specifically to hear him.
And me, I'm going to ask, well, if you believe in the United States was incorporated in 1871, why are you also quoting the Freedom of Color Act from 1948?
Right. But they don't see it. They don't, well, because I think at that point, the government is still rolling on. It's just doing it under a different pretense. And the laws are still being made and voted on and whatnot, and the court cases are still being adjudicated, and it's just all maritime law. It's all civil code. It's not laws per se.
And you know, honestly, if you had to adapt from a law, maritime was probably the best thing to pick from.
They also say that all police, all lawyers, and all judges, the whole judicial system, it's a society of law. That all their verbiage is all for talking amongst themselves. We're outside of that because we're sovereign.
Yes, to go to verbiage, that is what Leighton Ward actually did. No, it's really hard to find the information, and all I've found is reference to, not the actual use of, this source that he cites. In a conversation with his lawyer, or with the opposing lawyer, the district attorney, he requests the district attorney run the charges against him through a specific mathematical vocabulary equation, trying to decide what words are verbs, adjectives, and nouns, stating that if you add a verb before a noun, it changes the noun to a verb, thus nullifying the reference that you're making to something.
Right. He was like, he would have interpretations of law that you could read backwards and forwards and they would still mean the same thing.
Yeah. He's like, what the sentences, the charges that I filed against you are mathematically sound. I know how to speak your language, that's why I'm speaking it right now, but you need to run what you're writing to me back through my calculator, and then it has to make sense through my calculator, even though you don't know how to use my calculator. What? Right. You apply a 1 to a verb and a 2 to a noun, and then if you put a verb before a noun, it then becomes a verb, so then you have to put 3 verbs in order to have a noun?
Go fish. Yeah, so, you know, what kind of worries me, though, is, I mean, you've got, as you said, there's hundreds of thousands of people, probably even more. Those numbers are probably even old.
Red feather, no exclamation.
That believe in this and whatnot, and their whole life is about this. But when in actuality, there are conspiracies like the Fed that needs to be taken down. That this wasn't just a hunt and peck and choose, pick and choose, but this is the reality that we were hoodwinked by the income tax and the Fed. and that needs to be addressed. But all this distraction with other United States and 15 different governments and I don't know how many parties and Congress basically doing what Congress does, or their favorite thing, which is nothing, and and screaming about it, and making sure. A matter of fact, the whole point of doing nothing is so you have something to complain about the other party with the next time the voting season's here. So, they don't want to fix anything, because if you fix something, how are you going to win the next election?
Yeah.
If everything's
It's
happy
funny.
and everybody's happy, nobody will vote for anything. So yeah, there we
I
are.
I wish I could give you guys more about sovereign citizens because there is more, but I've
Oh, there's a
forgotten
lot.
almost as much as I've brought you tonight.
There's tons more, and there's every color and every flavor imaginable.
Oh, we do need to add a few other things. Hopefully, Data 100% agrees with me here. If you get pulled over in the United States, to be specific, but sure, if you get pulled over wherever in the world you are, and the officer asks you to roll the window down, you're obligated to roll the window down. If you're driving the car and the officer tells you he needs a certain paperwork from the car, that's what the officer needs.
Yeah, in other words, obey the law.
And I will recommend somebody who has 222,000 subscribers and does not need my puny recommendation. But I've watched several of his videos, including shit tons of other sovereign citizen videos. This guy is a cop in Minnesota. He seems down to earth. He talks about regular topics. He's been doing some live streams lately, I guess. I just started watching him a week ago, and I've watched a lot of his content. He's called Mike
Share
the
the
Cop.
share, Mike. What?
Mike the Cop on
Oh, okay.
YouTube. Just search
Why don't
that. You'll find him.
why don't you put the link in the chat?
Could I? Maybe? Let me see if I can do that on the fly as the producer, co-host thingamajig that I'm supposed to be. I got huge compliments yesterday, and I was like, "Well, I appreciate it, but okay, thanks." I'm trying not to do what my automatic impulse is, but you're wrong. Stop complimenting me.
I am a loser.
That's kind of what I feel sometimes.
Love.
I'm gonna give this Mike the Cop guy a shout out. Maybe I will be one of those real nice creators, and I will see if he'll do like a split stream podcast, cop chats with felon or something.
Red Feather's got it right. Not only obey, but be respectful.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's what Mike says. That's why I kind of love his work. He's like, by the way, and he does some funny quick clips on there where one of them is when you're getting pulled over by a cop, what you're going through versus what the cop's going through, and they got the guy going, "I'm driving the speed limit. Oh, my mirrors are good. Are my lights working? Everything in my license is okay. Where's my insurance card?" And the cop is in the back going, "Wah, wah, wah, wah," and then yelling into his mic and shit, like he's doing stuff through the mirror. But if he goes to the cutscene where you're looking at him and you can hear him, he's doing rock with the mic in front of his face, using it fake. It's just, it's not high quality video, but it's a cop being funny, and I, even as a felon, I find him entertaining, and I think it would be fun. I feel weird asking him because I've got like 280 subscribers and he's got 222,000 subscribers. But it would be fun to have like a cop chats with felon stream, just on a shoot the crap night.
That'd be fun.
Yeah, just for no reason other than you're a cop. I just wanna how like how well my conversation. Can you smell the weed on me, officer? I'm sorry. Don't pull me over.
Maybe it's not such a good idea after all.
Honestly, I've been watching this cop, and he's down to earth, and he's kind of funny. He's got his son that helps him produce, and he's got a buddy, and it is worth the watch. He's got hours of content. He's been doing YouTube as Mike the Cop for at least 2 years, I think, and I think it's hysterical. I want to thank everybody in the chat for showing up tonight. I see Red Feather's on her way out. Her there. I assume her. On the way out. And other people are probably ahead of and behind them. They. I don't know what to say anymore. I'm all confused.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming. That's what I'm supposed to say.
And that's the way it was.
And that's the way it was. I have a pillow in the store that I think is funny. I forgot to include it. But
oh yeah, right. Your what was it? It was a scream muffler.
Yeah, my scream muffler, one a bone.
It was a $30 scream muffler. If you feel like screaming, this is guaranteed for $30 to muffle your screams less loud than they would be normally.
Also, some people think it's kind of funny because I think it's funny. I don't know what I saved it as in order to... Maybe it was image 24.
Thank you for coming, Sora Luna.
Image 24, a Wanna-Bone pillow, now found for $30 on Streamlabs.
Bye-bye, Hans.
And thank you all for joining. Make sure you play with the buttons on the way out. We all love it when you play with the buttons. Thanks, everybody.
And comment.
And comment. Oh, yeah, Dada wants to comment. So comment here, and then go to his channel and comment there, too. Something different. Got to be interesting. And we'll see you all later. Bye.